Hi Year 13, so as promised I'm going to go ahead and record our lessons so that you can continue to use this as revision material, and hopefully it will be really helpful that if you feel that you missed anything in the lesson you can come back and go through it then yourself in your own time. Okay, so you will have done the starting activity already, but I'm just going to go through it again just to remind us of those key terms that will be required for this poem. So paganism is a religion that focuses more on nature. It does predate Christianity and it was very prevalent in Great Britain. Homoeroticism is arousal or sexual desire centered on someone of the same sex, which can be temporary. So unlike homosexuality, which is a more permanent state of identity or sexual orientation. Penance then is self-inflicted punishment due to a wrongdoing. But as I said, we've gone through those, hopefully you do recall what those were, and we can apply those to this poem. Okay, so I'll do as I usually do, I'll read through the poem and then we will go through it line by line. I have got some questions again for you to have a little think about before we sort of dive into it, but we did complete this in class, so hopefully you've already got your notes on that. So I'll read through it. The Lammas Hireling. After the fair, I'd still a light heart and a heavy purse. He struck so cheap, and cattle doted on him. In his time, mine only dropped heifers, fat as cream, yields doubled. I grew fond of company that knew when to shut up. Then one night, disturbed from dreams of my dear late wife, I hunted down her torn voice to his pale form. Stock still in the light from the dark lantern, stark naked, but for one bloody boot of foxtrap. I knew him a warlock, a cow with leather horns. To go into the hair gets you muckle sorrow, the wisdom runs muckle care. I levelled and blew the small hour through his heart. The moon came out. By its yellow witness I saw him fur over like a stone mossing. His lovely head thinned, his top lip gathered, his eyes rose like bread. I carried him in a sack that grew lighter at every step, and dropped him from a bridge. There was no splash. Now my herd's elf-shot. I don't dream but spend my nights casting ball from half-crowns, and my days here. Bless me, Father, if I have sinned. It has been an hour since my last confession. So those are some of the key questions that we looked at. As I've said, you've already done those in the lesson anyway, and you hopefully identified that and have those notes on it. So what we'll do now is we will go through the whole of the poem and make some notes as I sort of share with you some of the points that we shared in the lesson, some of the things that you've obviously made notes on already and contributed your own to. Okay, so I'll start with the first stanza, okay, and looking at the title as well, actually, before I dive into the first stanza. So, as we said there, the Lammas Hireling, so the title kind of gives us a little bit of an insight and link to paganism there as well. Now, in Christianity, there is a day also known as Loaf Mass Day. It's a Christian holiday. It celebrates the first annual wheat harvest, but obviously you can link that to paganism in terms of that celebration and worshipping of nature. And a hireling is obviously someone that has been hired. So this person, the person who transforms into a hare in the poem, in the body of the poem, is someone that is hired by who we can assume is a farmer, but we'll come to that in a moment. So the title gives us an insight of the focus of the poem. It is a dramatic monologue that's being created here, and it is an unreliable narrator as well, and we'll explore that a little bit, especially as we come towards the end. But there is some ambiguity that arises straight away, and it does raise many questions, which we get the answers to some, but we don't get the answers to all of them. It's a colloquial phrase, though, in terms of... oh, no, I'm not going to come to that yet, sorry. So, in the first stanza, after the fair, I'd still a light heart. So, we start with this subordinate clause. So, again, we are sort of entering almost into the action, into the middle of a story. So, after the fair. and there seems to be almost a colloquial, casual style to the way that the narrator is speaking, as though they assume that we already know what they're talking about. I'd still a light heart, so this is interesting because we've got antithesis to the end. We know that by the end of the poem he hasn't got a light heart because he's in confessional. He is sort of talking about a sin. So that adjective is interesting to begin with because we know that he is establishing the fact that he's carefree almost at the beginning of this poem. And a heavy purse. So there's emphasis there as well, the adjective heavy, suggesting that he's quite wealthy, that he hasn't got financial issue or problems there. He struck so cheap. Personal pronoun there could suggest that there is a sense of objectification about this person, that he's obviously buying for hire. He struck so cheap. Again, definitely the objectification there, and potentially capitalist ideas related to the hiring of this person. And cattle doted on him. So it suggests that when he hires this person, he does do his job very well, and there's a link there to the animals, and already that gives us again a link between paganism, because he's clearly good with animals and nature. Cattle doted on him. Doted there, that verb suggesting that they're affectionate towards him, that his presence is quite a nurturing one. It might well suggest a hint of jealousy, the fact that his cattle, his herd, responds better to this person that's been hired. In his time, mine only dropped heifers. So he's talking about the amount of milk that is being produced by the cattle. And a heifer is sort of linked to cattle that have recently produced young, and like their first lot of young. So they've not had cattle, they've not had a pregnancy before. Mine only dropped heifers. Fat as cream. So that simile, suggesting as well the impact that this hireling has got on the cattle. There's an exaggeration there that the milk that's being produced is very high quality, suggesting maybe that the cattle are content again with this hireling, that his manner, his way of caring for them, maybe puts them at ease, makes them sort of produce better quality of milk. Yields doubled, so there's a sort of a profit focus there, again financial, which links then to the idea of the heavy purse, how money is important to the farmer, to the narrator, which actually when we come to the end is quite, there's antithesis there. Money and financial security seems to be something that's very important to him at the start of the poem, but actually that becomes less important as we see at the end, which I will go through when we get to that. Grew fond of company that knew when to shut up. So I grew fond, of company that knew when to shut up. So fond, they're suggesting maybe that there's an affection growing with the narrator towards the person that he's hired. But there's almost a controlling aspect to it, quite authoritative in the way that he's sort of suggesting that he grows fond of this person, that knew when to shut up. It's quite aggressive as well, an unsettling contrast I put there as well. Then one night, so the night, the fact that this takes place at night as well, again gives us quite a sort of sinister tone. And links to that sort of authoritative voice of the narrator, that he seems unsettling as a person, and maybe comes back then to this idea of him being unreliable. Disturbed from dreams of my dear late wife. So we've got this alliteration, disturbed from dreams of my dear wife. And again, there's almost an unsettledness in that line, in that alliteration, that links to the verb of disturbed. The fact as well that we've got that enjambment from one stanza to the next as well, that's broken by caesura. There's unsettling, there's tension. from dreams of my dear late wife. Now, interesting that you've got the adjective dear and late next to each other, and it brings us questions then of what do we think might have happened to her. He refers to her as dear, but we haven't heard of anything else about her before that point, and late suggesting obviously that she's passed and that she's died. But considering then his actions later on in the poem, it almost raises questions about whether he had something to do with her death and her passing. I hunted down her torn voice to his pale form. So there's almost a link and a blurring between the lines of the person that he's hired and his wife. And it's interesting then that he associates his wife with the man, the hireling that he's employed. And torn as well, the adjective torn voice, is that sort of symbolic of suffering, of pain, to his pale form. Pale there as well, suggesting maybe a vulnerability or a weakness. And form is interesting as well because it's sort of dehumanizing the person that he's referring to. And why it makes us question again, why does he make this link? Is there maybe that attraction to this hireling? And that's where that idea of homoeroticism comes into it as well. I hunted down her torn voice. The hunted as well, the verb, has aggression to it, suggests that he is a predator, suggests maybe that the hireling is prey and weak. Stock still in the light from the dark lantern. So again, that sort of sibilance, the alliteration of the sibilance there, stock still, almost imitates that shock that would freeze the form of the hireling. In the light from the dark lantern, and this is almost an oxymoron, because how can a lantern be dark? It's meant to sort of give light. So there could be an ominous tone to that as well. There's almost like a gothic tone, really, in this part. The idea of dreams and being disturbed from a dream. And then this idea of dark light. Stark naked. So again, this might well be this link to paganism there, maybe to fertility. So stark naked, but for the fox trap biting his ankle. So he's obviously trapped. And again, it's interesting that he's sort of seen as vulnerable there, and he's been entrapped like a wild animal. Again, sort of that link to the hunting and hunted. I knew him a warlock, so that sort of clause is very declarative, and it's something that he doesn't question. Again, bringing the idea of him being quite authoritative in his nature. A warlock, again, sort of linking to the supernatural there, maybe linking to paganism, as a lot of pagans were sort of accused of witchcraft. A cow with leather horns, so that is actually a colloquial use there of a phrase, and it's actually referring to a hare. To go into the hare gets you muckle sorrow, so muckle meaning a lot of, so much sorrow. Again, we've got enjambment, we've got a lot of caesura as well in some of these lines, and that maybe there is that idea of lots of sort of uncertainty stopping and starting here as well. The wisdom runs muckle care. So again, we've got that idea of hardship here, emotional hardship, and lots of it. I levelled and blew the small hour through his heart. So levelling there, he's referring to levelling a gun and actually taking aim. So it's interesting actually that there's almost a sort of distancing himself from the action of pulling a trigger. But levelling, making it sound like he's quite level as well, that he is quite logical in what he's doing here and that he's in the right. I levelled and blew the small hour through his heart. So blew quite dramatic, the plosive sound of the B as well, sort of emphasising that verb being quite aggressive, considering that it's referring to shooting, through his heart. Heart being, significant there in terms of connotations of that's where, we assume affection comes from and love comes from. The moon came out, so again quite a supernatural atmosphere to it. Again, links to paganism there as well. The moon came out by its yellow witness. So humanlessness humanizes it, humanizes the moon. I suppose you could say that it's almost like bearing witness to what's going on there as well, because it can see what has happened. And actually the moon is very significant in paganism as well. The moon is often worshipped in paganism. I saw him fur over like a stone mossing. So there's imagery there, very mystical imagery, links to that idea of supernatural as well, and nature, like a stone. That simile is very, very important. And that verb, I saw him fur over, so that idea as well, that he's becoming more like a hare. His lovely head, so interesting use of the adjective lovely there, again kind of maybe linking back to the idea of homoeroticism. Head thinned, his top lip gathered, so that focus, that noun, focusing on the lip, could suggest a sort of sensual idea of focusing on the lips, because obviously lips were what we used to kiss. But gathering, that verb suggesting that it's becoming and looking more like a hair, so where it where they sort of split, and gathering up, so it looks more like a hair on an animal. His top lip gathered, his eyes rose like bread, so almost quite grotesque imagery at that point, suggesting that his eyes are becoming more like a rabbit's, where they're very much prominent, sort of rising like bread. And again, interesting use of lammas in the title, linking to that bread, that noun. His eyes rose like bread, but also it could suggest a fear, and that idea that when you're afraid, your eyes sort of bulge. His eyes rose like bread. I carried him, so again interesting. That's quite a sort of masculine trait, sort of revealing and emphasizing the strength of the narrator. And almost you could say like a man carries his wife over the threshold, so that there's again maybe a hint of homoeroticism there as well, that he carries him. Maybe that innocence of the person who's died as well, or like a child or a lover, he's being carried. But then obviously the caesura here over into the next stanza sort of shows that there isn't as much care as we think. So in a sack, and that grew lighter at every step. So could it suggest then that he's still transforming, he's still changing as he's carrying him? And dropped him from a bridge. So that verb dropped, suggesting a sort of non-caring attitude towards this hireling. There was no splash, so that's interesting. There was no splash, and splash has been kind of emphasised here by the enjambment and the fact that it's on its own on that line, because we've got the caesura. So there's the emphasis there and linked to that supernatural sense of the hireling as well, being more than just human. Now my herd's elf shot, so in other words they've been bewitched. But again, elf shot, linking and creating connotations back to supernatural and something that's not in nature. I don't dream, so emphasis there through the alliteration, and that verb dream. He no longer has those dreams and thinks about his wife, for example. He doesn't dream, maybe suggesting as well that he doesn't sleep, that he can't sleep after this happening to him. But spend my nights casting ball from half crowns. Now, if you remember from the first stanza, I said the importance of monetary wealth to this narrator, and actually a half crown is a coin, but now he's making bullets out of money, so for all his money and his wealth, it can't protect him, and he's using it to try and protect himself by casting it into little sort of balls, pellets, to fire from a gun. So casting ball from half crowns. And my days here. So we know now at this point that he's not in his home, in his dwelling, but actually he's going for daily confessional. So he's in a church when he's sort of confessing this and relating this. And that sort of imperative, bless me, he's asking for blessing. He wants protection. And again, sort of linking back to the title, the Lammas Hireling, the fact that it's to do again with sort of Christian ritual. Father, so obviously the listener is meant to be a priest. I have sinned, so that sort of emphasis there on the verb that's been end stopped on that line. I have sinned. So he's confessing, he knows that he's done wrong, and he feels possibly guilt, but actually maybe there's more of a fear there, that he's afraid of what's happened and what he's done and what's going maybe to happen to him as a result of that. It has been an hour since my last confession. So the interesting part of that line really is when he says about the time, the adverbial there of time, an hour. So why does he feel the need to confess every hour? Is it because he knows he cannot be forgiven? Is it because maybe of fear? And there's maybe that question of a broken psyche as well, because of what he has done. And again, like I said, that links back to the beginning where he talks about the light heart. So now his heart isn't light, he's burdened with this guilt, these feelings of remorse. So it's an interesting poem as well. There are some things that we can talk about and discuss here in terms of literal and metaphorical meaning. We can consider whether he is being a reliable narrator, because this idea of someone transforming and becoming a rabbit, a hare, is very unusual. So could it be that actually he was attracted to this hireling, this man, and because he felt that was not something that was acceptable, that he then has killed the hireling and is now sort of feeling guilt because he knows it's a sin, because he knows he's done something wrong, but this is him trying to kind of justify his killing of this person by creating such a hyperbolic story and something so unbelievable. It's almost fairy tale like, this idea of the hireling becoming a rabbit, or becoming a hare. I keep saying rabbit, but it's not, it's a hare, and those are totally different animals. But there's some really sort of interesting things as well that I've made some notes on here, so I'll just go through these. There is a sort of contention between this idea of Christianity versus paganism, which we could potentially see this as a sort of extended metaphor for Christianity, sort of overcoming paganism and killing paganism in the end, but actually it hasn't died off completely, so that's where maybe there's that fear at the end. That's why he's having to confess, showing that paganism hasn't been completely killed. Paganism, though, is linked to Christianity. We know that many of the big celebrations in the Christian calendar are actually based on pagan events. Traditional poetic form as well links maybe to the historic setting and the sort of maybe more archaic colloquial language that's used sometimes in this poem. For example, the fact that he refers to his wallet as his purse, and I know I mentioned that, I mismentioned that at the start, but there is that sort of colloquial language about the purse, because it's more sort of rural, then suggesting that it's that sort of 19th century time frame for the poem. So that traditional poetic form reflecting that. Contextually, hares are linked to witchcraft again, and fertility and paganism. There's links as well to the rhyme of the ancient mariner, so if you wanted to sort of look further into some contextual points to make for this particular poem, you could potentially go and look at the rhyme of the ancient mariner as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go over then the themes that we can explore for this poem, and again you may want to think about highlighting or identifying in some way the quotes that would link to the key themes that I'm about to display for you. Okay, so some of the key themes that transpire in this poem are the idea of transgression. So to transgress is to commit an act that goes against law, rule, or a code of conduct. It is often a significant plot device in narrative writing, and obviously we can see where he's transgressed in this way because he's taken a life. And we see him then trying to sort of repent of that. Whether that is a genuine feeling of repentation or not, we don't know, and we can sort of interpret it both ways, that maybe he is repenting because he feels genuinely sort of regretful for what he has done. It could, on the other hand, mean that he is just scared and fearful of what's going to happen to him, particularly with the ominous line that there was no splash when he threw the hireling into the river. Language and truth. So it's important to question the reliability of the narrator when reading a text. A narrator's voice can often be biased and misleading, and in this case we do only see things from the perspective of the narrator, so actually we can question whether he did actually see this hireling transform and change, which seems sort of very much sort of out of realms of reality, or whether he is just saying that to kind of give himself an excuse to cover the reason why he has actually killed this person. Society and culture. So this theme has been explored in previous poems, and unwritten rules in society and cultural norms can have significant impact on the creation of a character within the novel as well as on the reader. So for example, the fact that there's that colloquial language, there is reference to a purse, suggesting that it's more from the 19th century. It might suggest then that to be attracted to another man would not have been acceptable. So we can sort of question that within this poem as well, the sort of societal and cultural norms that may well have added to the narrator's choice of actions, and his choice then as well to obviously go to confessional and go to church, to try and sort of not necessarily rectify what he's done, but that feeling that maybe he will be forgiven if he confesses enough or he gives penance enough. Again, it's questionable, but we can certainly make links there to that sort of societal and cultural expectations. So as ever, I've put those bibliography together, those links from some of the sites that I've looked at to then sort of reinforce and form my own opinions as well. So feel free to look at those yourself. But hopefully that was really helpful, and as I said, you can use this now as a revision to add to the notes that you already have.